Amen. Guys, would you grab a Bible and make your way to the Gospel of Luke, where we're going to be this evening. Luke's Gospel, going to be in chapter 22. And just excited to see the things that God would lay before us. Hopefully you got a Bible and you're making your way there. If you don't, there's Bibles around you. If you grab one of those Bibles, you even got a page number on the screen that we'd love to have just be a space where you could follow along in that and be a part of that. Giving you that opportunity for you guys who are online and you guys who are just joining us in our overflow, just giving you the same invitation. Grab a Bible. Be with us. Take the Word of God and just long that it would be a space where He would work and He would move and He would draw us into the things that He has for us through His Word. So it's definitely what we want to ask for even right now. So I'm going to lead you guys in prayer, and I'm hoping that you would pray as well. That right now we would ask that God in His help and His favor would speak to us what He would have for us this evening. Would you join me? Father, thank you for your Word. Thank you that it's good. Thank you that what you say to us is always what we need to hear. God, thank you that you're a God who's speaking faithfully even now. I recognize that about you and ask for it right now, that you would take tonight and this space and you would speak to us through your Word. You would speak to us in your truth. That, God, you would cause us to hear your voice this evening. We ask for help in that. We ask for your work in that. Trust you and believe that you're a God who hears us. And so, God, right now, just asking that you give us ears to hear you. Speak to us through your Word. We ask together in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Well, Luke chapter 22 draws us to, honestly, one of the most pivotal weeks in the entire just space of human history. It is the week that Jesus is going to lay down His life on the cross. And I know we've just kind of walked through that in our calendar as we celebrated, Easter and all of that, but now we're here in Luke's Gospel, and I'm just drawing you to it. Hey, as it begins there in verse 1 of chapter 22, you might just notice even how he puts it. He says, "Now as the feast of unleavened bread drew near, which is called the Passover." Like we're heading right into that week and where we are. And I can put it to you this way. As we think about where we are in this passage, where we are at the beginning of Luke 22, it's the Wednesday in that final week of Jesus. It's the Wednesday of that Passion Week. We really believe, and some of you walked through it with us as we kind of walked through that whole week, that Jesus was crucified on Thursday and then, of course, resurrected on Sunday. That kind of putting some bearings into it, that means when you and I are reading this passage tonight, we're right one day before He's going to the cross. This is just in that kind of weight. The things that are unfolding are the final things, are the things that kind of head right into that moment. And all by itself, that should almost just elevate it. It almost should just be like, okay, there are weeks and then there are weeks. There are times that are just, okay, kind of normal things, and then there are the amazing things. And that's where we are. That said, not all of it is moving well. In fact, as our passage begins, we get to join with the sorrowful reality that Judas begins to move into that place where he is going to actively betray Jesus. Why don't you notice it with me as we read there in verse 2. It says, "The chief priests and the scribes sought how they might kill him, for they feared the people. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So he went his way and conferred with the chief priests and captains how he might betray him to them. And they were glad and agreed to give him money. So he promised and sought opportunity to betray him to them in the absence of a multitude." Wow. This is that moment. I mean, in one sense, you get it just said so clearly. The chief priests, the religious leaders have, kind of moved into the place that they've decided, hey, we need to kill him. We need to kill Jesus. He's, really kind of gumming up our works and hindering that. But behind that, that's actually what Satan is wanting. Again, it just tells us there in verse 3 that Satan's behind this, that he's entering Judas to really bring this about. And so you kind of feel this moment where there's just this onslaught that is pressing towards this place where Jesus is going to be crucified, where all that's going to be just hindering. And yet, in the midst of that, Judas becomes the one who's going to actively do that. Again, it just puts it to us in a powerful way there in verse 3. Then Satan entered Judas, surnamed Iscariot, who was numbered among the 12. So Judas, this guy that we know, probably most of us, he's one of the 12 that have spent the last 3 years with Jesus. He's been there every day just serving with that, and yet this becomes his moment that he's going to turn and betray Jesus. Now that raises so many questions for us. I mean, in one sense, people try to figure out, like, what is Judas thinking? I mean, where is he going in the midst of this? There's a few things we know. We know it wasn't an instantaneous decision. We know he didn't just decide in this moment to become someone who was kind of playing a hypocrite and going a different direction. We know from John's gospel that for a while he's been stealing, that he's been handling the money box and he's been taking from it. And you can almost just imagine. And again, how that worked out. I mean, did he believe it at first? When he first was picked to be a follower of Jesus, did he buy into it? Did he expect more? Did he expect it to be more military, more, kind of seeing the things that the Jews wanted? Did he expect more personally? We don't really know. All we know is that somehow this has been building. This place where he's, been kind of just not happy with where things are going and beginning to resist. And yet now at this moment, it shifts. Now at this moment, this one who has been kind of growing in that space, he becomes that one that Satan actually enters him. And it's a sad moment. It's a defining moment. It's a moment where this, marks him. And at this point, he moves to actively into this place where he's going to seek to be the one that kind of gives Jesus over to be crucified. And again, it's just a hard thing to even imagine. Lots of things we could quickly say, but let me just try to answer a couple quick questions that doesn't answer all the questions. This we know. We know that Judas is not redeemed. We know that Jesus would speak about it in John 13 in this very moment where he would say, hey, this man is a son of perdition, that the forgiveness that Jesus is offering does not apply to him because of his rejection. There's no sense. I mean, sometimes people are like, well, maybe Judas thought he was doing a good thing. Like maybe he's like, no, he doesn't. I mean, he's actively doing this. Satan enters him, but there's no sense that Satan is now forcing Judas to do that. It's already the choices he's been making. It's the choices that have been kind of building up to this place, and now in this openness and this rebellion, he moves from being influenced to, well, again, actively being entered into by Satan. Much I don't understand about all of that, but again, I just pointed out to you in verse 3, Satan entered Judas. And so now he seeks to do it. He goes and confers with the chief priest and like, how do we want me to do this? How is this going to happen? They negotiate a price because he's kind of driven that way for money. They offer him a price. And in a crazy moment, I mean, in almost just this surreal place, you can almost imagine it in verse 5. And they were glad. I mean, here these people are wanting to betray Jesus and they're so excited. They're like, this is the way we're going to do it. Like, we've been wanting to do this, and this is, I mean, they're just like, they're like, wow, this is amazing. Like, we actually got an inside guy, and we're going to be able to do this, and they're so excited. And so Judas promises them. He says, okay, I'm in. I commit to this whole thing. And he begins seeking a space where he could betray Jesus without it being something that would bring about a crowd response. And so to do it in secret. And so you watch this whole thing happening, and it's troubling and sad, but altogether clear. I mean, Judas becomes this mark of one who is this one who betrays Jesus, who is a son of perdition, who he's going to, end up giving the money back after it happens, but then he's going to kill himself. And again, the Bible marks him as an unredeemed man. And just something about this moment is altogether just heartbreaking and destructive and serious, but all of it's leading to this place where Jesus is about to enter into this moment. Well, to that, we get this next space where they begin to take part in the Passover meal and to begin to walk in that. You might just notice it in verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread when the Passover must be killed. And he sent Peter and John saying, go and prepare the Passover for us that we may eat. Now, it's worth just kind of thinking this through for a moment. And for you guys who were tracking with us in the whole kind of Easter and the timing of Jesus' death and how it worked out, I mean, one of the interesting things is that Jesus seems to take his Passover early. Now that's really, really helpful if you're kind of trying to put together the whole gospel picture, because it will tell us that the rest of the Jews haven't taken Passover yet. When they go to kind of put Jesus on the cross, they show up in John's gospel and they won't even go in because they don't want to be hindered from taking their Passover, which they're going to take tomorrow night. They're going to take on the Thursday night. But Jesus takes his early, on the very day when everybody else is killing their Passover lambs, which is the day kind of heading up to that. Jesus takes part in a Passover. Now, lots of questions we could ask, like, how did they know? I mean, how did they know it was supposed to happen this day? Obviously Jesus communicated it. Did they even have a Passover lamb? Probably not. I mean, not in the sense, because Passover lambs are just being killed. And that's kind of a fun little thing to think through, that Jesus is the Passover lamb for it. Either way, they head into this moment where they're going to take part in this, where they're going to, just take part in this place, in this Passover that's a part of it. Now, this Passover, this meal that Jesus is about to partake in with the disciples, it's really where we're going to spend the rest of our evening. Everything else in this chapter, or in the first half of the chapter that we're going to cover this evening, all of it take place in this Passover meal. All of it take place in this space that's there. So again, I kind of want you to feel that. I kind of want you to feel this private, this place where they're going to have this space and this quiet spot that's going to be a part of it. And again, just in that space where he's taking it early in the midst of that, while everybody else is killing their Passover lambs, which is fascinating all by itself. And yet there's an amazing way to begin to see how this unfolds. In fact, you probably understand it. You've probably seen it before, but I'd like you to try to imagine it. So again, he tells Peter and John in verse 8, go and prepare the Passover for us, that we may eat. And they said to him, well, where do you want us to prepare? And he said, behold, when you have entered the city, a man will meet you carrying a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he enters. And when you say to the master of the house, the teacher says to you, where is the guest room, that I may eat the Passover with my disciples? Then he will show you a large furnished upper room. There make ready. So they went and found it just as he had said to them, and they prepared the Passover. It's kind of a crazy little scene. I just want you to imagine it. So they're there, Jesus is like, hey, we're going to have the Passover. And they're like, okay, great, we're having the Passover day early. Where are we supposed to do that? He says, here's what I want you to do. You're going to go into the city, and you're going to find a man carrying water. Now, all by itself, just we understand that culturally that was not the normal thing. So having the man carrying water, it would have stood out in a crowd. It would have been something like, okay, that's, there's not like 10 guys carrying, water pitchers. It's just one. It's like, okay, that's the guy. And so now the guys watch him, and he says, okay, just want you to follow him. So I'm kind of imagining the disciples like, okay, we're following, and just like, trying to follow this guy wherever he goes. And when he goes into a house, you go into the house. And then when you're there and kind of shocked, you tell him, so we're here, where's the upper room? Where's this place where we're going to have and he'll show you and you make it ready. And there's a few things that are just amazing about this. For starters, I just want to tell you it's a beautiful picture of things that God is doing. There's much that we begin to think through of a sovereign setup, of opportunities that are prepared. Like, how did this man know to prepare the house? How did all of this happen? There's both supernatural and maybe even natural. Maybe Jesus has made arrangements with somebody and said, hey, can we use your room? I mean, this is Passover season. It's the time where Jews come from all over Israel. It's packed to the hilt. There's no sense that there's extra rooms. I mean, this had to be something set aside for Jesus. And so somebody has the room set aside for him there in Jerusalem. And he tells them about this, and yet we watch the disciples just walk in that. We watch them kind of say, okay, Jesus gives them the instructions, and they follow that, do exactly what Jesus says. And again, it just tells us, they went and found it just as he had said. Like he said, that's what it would be, and then they walk in that. One of my favorite verses that we have talked about a number of times, obviously, is Ephesians 2:10, where God just simply says, we are his workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. Now, this is a passage that God speaks about our lives, and because he's speaking about us, he's speaking about all of us. And if you're a follower of Jesus, you're his workmanship. Like he is shaping your life. He's molding you and growing you, and you are one that he has kind of taken on as a pet project, if you will. His workmanship to shape you. But part of that shaping is so that your life could be about the things that he has for you. There's not any one of us that we're extras on the set. There's not any one of us that has no purpose to our life. And yet there's a reality here that he's telling us, if you believe this, then God has gone ahead of you. there's sovereign setups. There are opportunities that God has already created for you. There are things that all you have to do is walk in them. Now, I love that reality, and I love that it's true, and it's true every day, but I love seeing it here in kind of practical outworkings, because it kind of gives us, not that it happens like this all the time, but you could almost watch it happen. Like, you could see the disciples being involved in setting up this Passover meal, and you would say, that's a sovereign setup, and they walked in it. That's something that God prepared, and they did it. And it should almost encourage us to think, boy, I want that to be me. I don't know if that's you. It's not uncommon. I don't pray through it every single day, but it's not an uncommon prayer for me, that I will begin my day praying through Ephesians 2:10, just saying, God, I just want to see it. If there's an opportunity today, I want to walk in it. If there's something you want me to do, help me to see it, or just show me to do it. I mean, if there's somebody you want me to talk to, if that you want me to run into somebody, I mean, you prepare opportunities, and I want to do them. I mean, that's just something we should long to do, and I love watching that happen. Now, all of that, again, is helpful, but it's also worth just kind of noting, and you might be thinking through like, well, this was kind of weird. I mean, what just happened? I mean, this almost seems like a super secret spy movie or something, you know, like, okay, they're like sneaking around. Why is that happening? Well, it's not hard to understand if you put it in context of what we just talked about. Judas is looking to betray Jesus. He's looking for a private space. He's looking for a place where there's no crowds, where he can betray Jesus. This would have been an amazing space. But it's not a space that Jesus wants to give him. He's going to go to Gethsemane right after this, and Judas is going to know that space, and Judas is going to come, and that's where he's going to betray Jesus. But there's something about this next few moments that Jesus is particularly doing something so that it's secretive, so that in one sense, not even the disciples know where they're going. They're like, so where are we going? It's like, I'm not going to tell you. Follow a guy. There's a guy carrying a water. You follow that. And it's just this amazing, beautiful picture of God kind of navigating even in the difficult space, which again becomes a beautiful thing and even helpful. So they were watching through this. They begin to kind of move into this moment. They head into this Passover meal, and this is where in this Passover meal, Jesus is going to institute the Lord's Supper, or what we also call communion, and again, an incredibly powerful reality. Much that's happening in the midst of that, and as we begin to think about all of that, I want to just tell you that in many ways, hopefully this is something that for most of you, or many of you, you just walked through with us. I mean, it's just been a few weeks, right? We just went through this whole thing. We had a Passover Seder here, and many of you guys were here. And I'm just going to draw you a little bit to that because we talked about so many things then. There's no way to pull it out, but that's what's unpacking here. So I'll tell you what, let's read it, and then we'll talk about it. Verse 14. When the hour had come, he sat down, and the 12 apostles with him. Then he said to them, with fervent desire, I have desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. I mean, you've got to pause and you almost got to feel that. He just looks at his disciples and says, I've been looking forward to this. I with a passion, with a fervent desire, I wanted to share with you in this moment. I want this to be a part of what we have. For I say to you, verse 16, I will no longer eat of it until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. Then he took a cup and gave thanks and said, take this and divide it among yourselves. For I say to you, I will not drink of the fruit of the vine until the kingdom of God comes. And he took bread and gave thanks and broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Likewise, he took the cup after the supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. But behold, the hand of the betrayer is with me at the table. And truly the Son of Man goes as has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. Then they began to question among themselves which of them would do this thing. So they're there. They're in this Passover meal, and Jesus begins to share it. And again, for you guys who are with us, and if you weren't, I apologize. Hey, you can even get it online, or if you're looking for it. I want to just remind you that when we think about communion, when we think about all that it is, it finds its root in the Passover. So Jesus takes something that had been around for 3,000 years and just compels that into a space where that would become what communion is. So there's no way to fully understand what communion is if you don't see its roots in this Old Testament Passover, what God gave to the children of Israel to be a part of. They're just every year remembering their rescue. Now, there's an incredible amount of detail, and again, I just touch it briefly and hopefully for a reminder. In a Passover Seder, there's really 4 movements. There's really 4 movements that kind of move through that evening. In fact, for them, they would have 4 cups, whether they would have 4 separate cups or just refill the cup 4 times as they would move through that Seder. And that's helpful for us to begin thinking it through. It's worth noting that the last one is really a space where they look forward to what's coming. And Luke really begins by unpacking for us that there. So you're noticing again as he tells us this, Jesus is saying, boy, I want to share this Passover with you before I suffer. For he says, I will no longer eat of it, in verse 16, until it is fulfilled in the kingdom of God. That part of what he unpacks for us is that what's taking place here, this place of communion, the Lord's Supper, is something that he's going to kind of put it into space of saying, hey, there's a place where we're going to take this again with Jesus, and he draws us to that expectation. Now, in Matthew's gospel and Mark's gospel, he lets us know that he says this at the end of this, and maybe he said it both spaces. Maybe, he kind of says it at the beginning and then re-says it at the end, but it kind of pulls into that flavor of communion, that part of communion is always a forward look of kind of gazing at that, and that's usually the last part of it. Well, we'll come back to it because of that, but it really begins. If you were to look at the communion, the Passover, it really begins, the very first movement of that is a time of cleansing. And you get a picture of that here. I mean, I don't know if you were noticing it. Some would even get confused because when Jesus is instituting the Passover, you kind of have cup, bread, cup. I mean, you kind of get he gives them the cup in verse 17, then he gives them the bread in verse 19, then he gives them a cup again in verse 20. And again, some English people, kind of translations would say, well, maybe he was just preparing the way, but it doesn't feel that way. There is a sense that at the very first cup was a space where they would go through cleansing. There was a lot of cleansing rituals that the Jews would do, and it was a place, of entering into partaking of the Passover, of longing to do that. Now, Jesus does something so amazing. John's gospel gives it to us in greater detail. This is where he girds himself with a towel and washes the disciples' feet, and he teaches them a powerful lesson about forgiveness. Teaches them the power of forgiveness, the need of forgiveness, so much weight that is there. That is a profound thing that we could spend a much amount of time on, but it's really not what the text is going, and really we don't have the time to dive into that. But I want to quickly just say it this way. Hey, for us to take communion, it's a place of doing that. It's a place of if you take communion the way the Bible's calling us to take communion, it's always a place of us saying, God, I just want to make sure, I want to deal with my sin. I need you to wash my feet. I need you to work through that in my life. And so that's a powerful reality. Now, hey, quick FYI, you're going to get an opportunity. Maybe you already figured that out. We're going to talk about communion. Tonight, we're going to end with taking communion. We're going to end our evening in doing that. So I'm kind of giving you some help right now saying, if you take communion tonight and you do it well, if I can put it to you that way, then part of it is a place of just saying, God, I really want to be clean. Jesus, I don't want there to be anything between you and I. If there's any, just weight of that, it's always meant to be that way. In fact, it's an interesting thing because Paul talks about it in Corinthians, and he warns them, he says, because they weren't doing this, and they were allowing animosity to still kind of be there, it was actually something that was bringing them into places of suffering and even sickness, which is just all by itself fascinating. Again, if you want to look later, that's 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and you can kind of dive in there and see that. Chapter 10, 11, that kind of pull that out and see all that. But much of that's happening here. And so that first place is that. And so Jesus does that with the disciples. They're here. He gives them this cup. He divides it among them and tells them, hey, this is not, we're going to take of this again in the kingdom of God. And then he walks them through the second part of it. He takes the Passover bread, just the unleavened bread that would have been a part of it. Verse 19, he took the bread, gave thanks, broke it, and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. For any that were here, this is the afikomen. This is the dessert. This is after the Passover meal. This is this incredible, powerful picture of God sending a rescue. But it's worth being very simple about it right now. So the Passover Seder and part of it, this part of a Seder was really intended to focus on what God had done. What God had done in rescuing them, where they were. That there was a sense of recognizing the judgment, the pain, the sorrow, the suffering, the emptiness, the just no hope in the midst of it that was a part of that. So for me, when you take communion, that's a part of it. Taking the bread really is a past tense. It's almost as if you're taking the bread and you're looking back and saying, that's where I was. This is who I was without Jesus. This is, without him, I was under judgment, I was under condemnation, I was under all of these things. And so that part of taking the bread is always to look back and say that. Then they would move forward and they'd take the cup, which is what Jesus does. He says, likewise, he took the cup after the supper, saying, this is the cup of the new covenant in my blood, which is shed for you. So he takes this part, and so this is the part of the Passover dinner, the third cup, the cup of salvation, that he says, here's what you're doing. This is me. This is a way that you're going to remember me. Obviously, the creating of communion, the Lord's Supper, is a place he says, do this in remembrance of me, that you're to remember what Jesus did when he came. And this one really is a focus on the present. If it's helpful, and again, if it lands with anybody, to take communion well, it begins with you saying, okay, God, I just want to be right with you. I'm going to remember where I was, and now I'm going to recognize where I am. Now I'm going to recognize who I am. And here's the reality. If you're a follower of Jesus, you have a covenant with God in the blood of Christ. You are now, everything you've really ever needed is paid for. Like Jesus has paid the price of your salvation, that there's a space of just recognizing the absolute wonder and glory of all that he is and all that he's brought you into. So it's a place of just saying, okay, God, I recognize this, I joy in this, I joy in all that is. And then they would usually end that by kind of just that consummation. They'd have a chair for Elijah, and they would say, okay, are we there? Are we almost in the midst of it? So reminding you of it very simply. So Jesus is now taking this, and he's creating this brand new thing, this thing that has its roots in the Old Testament Passover, but now is for us as New Testament believers. And he creates that which we take as communion, taking it often, taking it as a part of our lives, but its intention is to remember him. And maybe you already do that well, but if not, I'm just telling you it's meant to be powerful. It's meant to be one of those moments that almost arrest you and kind of just catch you and think, okay, wait, let's think of the big things. Let's be right with God, and let's remember where I was. Let's remember where I am. Let's think through heaven and kind of just feel all of that and be able to say, all of that is Jesus. All of this is because of what Jesus did. There's the only reason that I can be clean, that I can be rescued from my sin, that I can have the present relationship with God, that I have a future hope, is because of who Jesus is. And so he gives that to his disciples right here, which is just this amazing moment, this moment where he creates that just really hours before they're heading into this space, hours before all that this is going to happen. And that reality should just wash over us. I mean, there is this incredible thing. Now, that being said, I do need to say this. It really is only true for those who are believers. So right in this moment, we've just talked about this reality of communion where we're celebrating what Jesus is for us, that he rescued us from sin, brings us into him. We have eternal hope. Right in the midst of that, Jesus just brings it out in verse 21. But behold, the hand of my betrayer is with me at the table. Like he looks and says, like one of you, like right here, is going to betray me. And truly the Son of Man goes, as whom it has been determined, but woe to that man by whom he is betrayed. Then they began to question among themselves which of them would do this thing. And again, if you have any kind of imagination that you can just do this, it's just this crazy moment. I mean, Jesus has just instituted communion. It's powerful. There's this incredible weight of something that they probably don't even begin to understand. And then Jesus just looks at him and says, but one of you isn't in. One of you right here is going to betray me. The disciples were shocked. I mean, honest they were. I mean, they didn't know it. No, I mean, Judas has been such a very good fake that nobody's like, well, it's Judas, because he's the guy that wears black. The kind of black hat gave him away. It's like, no, nobody ever they didn't see it happening. He didn't seem nefarious. They're like, who? And they even began, like, Lord, is it me? I mean, could you be talking about me? The Gospels let us know. And they began to ask, like, who could this be? Like, who would do this? And it's this incredible moment that is both just ripe with emotion, but it's also powerful for me to say this again right here. if you can feel even a little bit of what communion is, if you can feel even a little bit of the celebration of what it is to be, in this covenant of blood with Jesus, then there's a way of just understanding that's only true for believers. I mean, Judas is there at the table. I mean, he's at the table, he's partaking of some of this, and Jesus is saying, but it doesn't work for him. This isn't true for him. This isn't true for this one, because there's one at the table that all that I'm telling you, as beautiful and powerful it isn't true there. And that reality just, again, gives me the weight to say, hey, that's always true. One of the dangers is that sometimes going through the motions gives people the appearance, or even just like, I took communion. I mean, I go to church. I somehow, surely God's going to let me in. And he's like, no, it's not. I mean, you can go to church and you could take communion and you could go through all the motions, but that's not going to be your rescue. Unless you're honestly His, unless you honestly have a relationship with Him, none of these things become the things that save us. And so I have this moment of just saying, hey, if that's you this evening, I mean, please understand, don't just think, hey, well, I'm going to take communion tonight and be okay. No, always when we take communion, there's a call to say, hey, there's a genuine call to relationship. There's a genuine call to say it doesn't work just to go through the motions. Someone who takes communion and is not a believer just had a piece of bread and had some juice. It didn't do anything for them, because it only is a reminder of what Jesus has done for us. Well, that weight is rolling in on this moment. We're kind of feeling all of that, and it's just this heavy, at least for me, I'm kind of imagining this heavy moment, but it's really weird where it goes next. Because now it tells us right there at this table, they're still around the Passover Seder table, they're still kind of just had these incredible moments. Now there was a dispute among them as to which of them would be considered the greatest. This is a really funny kind of thing. I mean, here they are. I mean, they begin arguing about who's bigger and who's greater in the midst of this, and it's happening right there. I mean, for me, I'm having this, like, weren't you guys didn't just a moment ago, like, Lord, is it me? Am I going to be the one that betrays you? And this whole kind of place of communion, and now they're like kind of comparing themselves among them. I mean, this is this crazy place. It's not an uncommon argument for the disciples, though, by the way. One where there was this place of them kind of considering and comparing themselves between each other, trying to find standing. But the danger is, it's really easy to read it and not actually feel it. See, the danger is they're really kind of trying to find their identity. That would maybe be the more modern way we would say it. And if I can say this well, I just want to tell you, unless God helps you, unless you're rescued from what sin is in you, you do this. Unless you are rescued supernaturally from what sin is, there's something about you that is always trying to find your identity. And often the way you do this is by comparing yourself to other people, where you think, well, am I doing better than them? Am I doing worse? Where do I stand with them? I mean, for them, sometimes it could be, how much, maybe money you had or position, but sometimes it even just kind of went in faithfulness. And so it's a really weird thing that you could come and sit in church here tonight, and honestly, there's a piece of you that's kind of finding your identity. It's like, well, I'm here and they're not. I'm a Wednesday night person. That kind of puts me like, I'm a little better than those who just come on Sunday, because look at me and look what I do. And there's this place where we compare ourselves and try to figure out who we are. And that without I wish I could say it better than I'm saying it, but you are always tempted to do this. You're always kind of trying to figure out where you land and who you fit. So it's not actually that surprising. Lots of reasons it could have come up at this moment, but it's where they are. And so Jesus just speaks to them and hopefully to you tonight as well. He said to them in verse 25, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those who exercise authority over them are called benefactors. He says, when we think about the way this works, is in the world, that's how it works. In the world, the kings of this Gentiles and the way the world works, that's the way it works. So that you kind of are known by what you have and what serves you, and even just by being a benefactor, by being one who, you kind of are the one that's supplying into other people's lives. But he simply says it this way, but, and I love this but, not so among you. Like, that's not the way this is meant to work for you. On the contrary, he who is greatest among you, let him be the youngest, and he who governs as he who serves. So he challenges us. He calls us in this moment. And the weight of it, again, it's like we're having this conversation hours before Jesus goes to the cross. So certainly this is not one of those, unimportant conversations. Don't live this way. Like, that's not how you are. That's not how we're not meant to be defined by those things. That's the way the world does it. It's not the way we do it. Instead, we just should be those who are just serving, who are living their lives kind of trying to do Ephesians 2:10. Like, Lord, I'm your workmanship. You show me what to do, and I'll do it. Like, I just want to live my life in this way where it's serving. And Jesus says that's what he's doing. It says in verse 27, who's greater, he who sits at the table or he who serves? Is it not the one who sits at the table? Yet I am among you as the one who serves. He says in the world, which one would be, considered the greater? It would not be the one serving, but Jesus says, I've been serving you. I've been serving you. So who's actually the greater? It's not working in the world's way of values and places, and yet he just tells them, but you are those who have continued with me in my trials. I bestow upon you a kingdom, just as my Father bestowed one upon me, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom and sit on the thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. That he's letting them know, hey, I'm going to give you, I'm going to bestow upon you a kingdom. I'm going to be the one that gives that. And it's just a very different way of it working. The kingdom is not what they're earning. It's what Jesus is giving. The kingdom is not earned by what they've done. It's what Jesus is bestowing upon them. And for them, very specifically, they're going to have roles that carry on into eternity. That the disciples, the 12, have roles that will carry on into eternity. So those are not ours, but the reality still lies the same. That he's calling us to a different way, and it would rescue us. But I'm just going to tell you that for all of us, probably, most of us, certainly, these are things that we're having to do all the time. There's a place where you're trying to find identity, and your identity isn't found in what you have or your position or what you've done. Your identity is found in Christ, where you say, I'm his. And I just live my life, and he gives me opportunities, and ultimately I can only give him the credit for it. In fact, everything I get, even the kingdom, is him bestowing it on me. And it's an entirely different way of living that would rescue us from this place of finding our identity in other things. Oh, God would give us the help in it, and yet so often we live beneath that, just knowing that that's where they are, and so he gives them that. But there's one more thing that happens at the table that Luke gives us here, one more thing that happens at this Passover dinner where they've had it. Jesus then looks over in verse 31. He said, Simon, Simon, indeed Satan has asked for you, that he may sift you as wheat. So we've just had this whole place, and again, I'm kind of just trying to track with the emotions of this moment. I mean, we've kind of gone through this incredible kind of secretive Passover, to this beautiful kind of unpacking of the beginning of the Lord's Supper. We have someone's going to betray. We had this argument of greatness. And it's as if your emotions aren't riding this roller coaster enough. Jesus just looks over at Peter and says, Peter, you're going to deny me. I just want to tell you that Satan's been asking for you, and he begins to unpack for Peter his struggle and his failing that's just about to happen. Now, we're going to talk about it briefly with Peter, but let's just quickly understand it. It is equally true for all of us. That what is going to happen in this next few moments is true for every follower of Jesus, it's certain. And what Jesus does for Peter, he can do for us. So he looks over at him and he gives us this incredible moment, just like letting us know that Peter's just about to deny Jesus. He's going to do it 3 times. I mean, he's going to totally fail Jesus very soon. But as Jesus unpacks that, he just tells Peter, hey, Peter, I just want you to know, Satan has been asking for you. Because he wants to sift you. He wants to shake you and shake your life and kind of almost just cause you to be kind of cast aside, almost as wheat would be cast aside, or the chaff would be taken away from the wheat. And there's much that gives this. It's worth quickly noting that Satan has to ask. He didn't have access to Peter unless Jesus allowed it. But as encouraging as that is, Jesus is going to allow it. Peter is going to fail. And Satan's like, I want him. I want to tempt this guy. I want to do this and to bring his life. And so Jesus just looks at Peter and says, hey, I just want to let you know, this is happening. This is kind of where he's been engineering this. He's been kind of preparing to kind of, bring you into a moment where you're going to fail, and just letting you know about that. Satan's been asking for you in the midst of this, but Jesus gives him encouragement. It says in verse 32, which is a great but I have prayed for you, that your faith should not fail, and that when you've returned to me, strengthen your brethren. He says, but I just want you to know, Peter, I've been praying for you. Now, that's really a nice thing. I mean, I kind of have these other weird conversations in my head. It's like, well, couldn't you have just told him no? I mean, could you have just said Satan no? I mean, why did you have to say yes? And but he is. He's like, I'm praying for you. And that's okay. That's a good piece of advice and encouragement. And the Bible tells us Jesus is doing that for us. I mean, this isn't something past tense. It tells us that right now, as our high priest tells us in Hebrews, that he's ever at the right hand of the Father praying for us. So what's happening here with Peter is still happening with you. And he's looking upon him and says, but I want you to know I've been praying for you because I see what's coming. I see what's coming. I see the temptation that's about to happen, and I just want you to know, hey, I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you very specifically that your faith won't fail, that you won't give up, that you won't turn back from me, that you'll hold fast to me. It's always what God is looking for in our lives, a place that would be there, that would be in the midst of this, that would be a part of that. But in the midst of it, just hear the way he words it. He says, but I have prayed for you that your faith should not fail, and when you have returned to me, strengthen your brethren. When you have returned. Jesus is not just telling Peter he's going to be tempted. He's going to tell him, you're going to fall. You're going to fail. And I'm praying for you. I'm praying for you that when that happens, and you get back up, and you come back to me after that failing, boy, I want you to know that I have a plan for your life still, and I just want to strengthen you. So try to process this through with me for a moment. God knows everything. He knows everything that has ever happened, everything that is happening, and everything that will happen. If you're a follower of Jesus, one of the problems in this whole place is when we sin and when we fail. Now, there's nothing I'm about to say that is meant to encourage that. There's nothing like, hey, it's not a big deal, don't worry. No, sin is always costly, and it is always harmful. It is never to be encouraged. But please understand this now. There's not anything you have done. There's not anything you will ever do that is going to surprise him. Like ever. I mean, ever. It surprises you. It surprises me. Sometimes it gets there. We get in spaces where like, well, I just don't think that would ever happen to me. And then something happens, and it does. There's never a moment that God would look at you and say, I picked you to be mine, and then I had no idea you were going to be like that. I had no idea that you were, just never mind, tossing you back, kind of thing. And he's like, I know what I got when I got you. And it's as if Jesus could look at you and there's not any space or struggle or failing in your life that he couldn't do exactly what he's doing for Peter. And I would put to you, he has. He says, I see it. I see what's coming. I see the temptations are coming and Satan's wanting you. But I've been praying for you. And I'm praying that you'll hold on. I'm praying for your faith. And you're going to fail. Just honestly, that's just the truth. And there's not any one of us that are going to say, well, it's not me. I'm never going to fail again. No, you're going to fail. Your sin is real. Your struggle is, and as much as I would encourage you, of course, not to, there are places that you're going to. And she's like, when you've done that, come back. Get back up. I want you to return to me. And then out of that, I want that to be something that you strengthen others. Now, Peter's going to struggle with this greatly. He's going to deny Jesus 3 times, and that's going to go badly for him. Eventually, he's going to go back, and if you read through John's gospel, he goes back and almost decides to go fishing. He's like, I'm done, like God's done with me. And Jesus is going to encourage this all the more. Like, I have a plan for you. I'm not done with your life. I still want to work through you, but that power should be a part of that. Now, I love all of this, and I love that this is real, and I'm just telling you that it's true for you right now, that this is what you need. But what's amazing is Peter doesn't believe it. I mean, you can probably catch the whole scene. You've seen it. So Peter responds in verse 33, he says, but Lord, I'm ready to go with you both to prison and death. Peter argues with Jesus like, no, that's not going to happen. Like, I'm not going to fall away. I mean, you're probably talking about John. Like, it's not me. I mean, because I'm Peter. I'm the rock. I'm not going to let you down, Jesus. I'm willing to die for you. And Jesus says to him, I tell you, Peter, the rooster shall not crow this day before you will deny me 3 times that you know me. It's not even going to be 24 hours. I mean, they're already in Wednesday night. Jesus is going to be put on the cross by tomorrow morning. Within probably 12 hours, Peter is going to do what he never thought he would do. And yet there's something here that if he could have come at it differently, you kind of think, okay, Peter, what if he had said, look, Lord, I don't want to fail you. I mean, help me not. I mean, could this picture have been played out differently? Maybe. But one way or another, it describes this place of God working in the midst of Peter, drawing him to this and into this weight and reality of everything that we are. So let's kind of put it together with what we've talked about tonight. So surely the central thought is Jesus is about to die. Communion becomes that powerful reality that's what we're supposed to remember, and that's what we're going to do in just a few moments. But out of this, we're watching these other things happen. We're kind of watching, just the way that he's kind of navigating, kind of giving them opportunities. They could walk in these things, this place where they're going to find their identity, where that's found. Judas' betrayal, and yet Peter's failure. And they're very two different things. And so there's a space that rolling in and out of this that becomes, honestly, really where we are. That as much as I could try to communicate it, I long that we go deeper. I'm just telling you, we're not just talking about something in the past. Like right now, we need to remember Jesus. And right now, that would form for us a lot of things. It would both be helping us find our identity in Him. It would be a place where we'd be able to walk in the things that He'd lay out for us. It would be a place where He would even be able to meet us and carry us. And I don't know where you are in this struggle with temptation and where you are in the struggle with sin. I could probably say it in ways that have been well said by others. There's not anybody in this room that you're in one of 3 relationships with your sin right now. Either you just sinned and you're kind of even here tonight just struggling, like thinking, I don't know if I fit here. You're just in the midst of that, or you've just come out of it. Like, okay, you're kind of just out. That's where you were, but now you've just come out of it, or you're about to go into it. I mean, sin is so real. Struggle is so real. So temptation. Not saying we always fall in those things, but the power of this reality actually becomes a place that we could begin to see this isn't something that is ineffective for my life. It should be a place that's like, I need to come. I need cleansing. I need to deal with sin. I need the weight of what communion could be. I need the weight of finding my identity in Him and the power that would even begin to strengthen me so that in this battle, I would find Jesus to be my source, both in His death that pays the price for my sin, but in His prayers for me that would carry me up out of my failures. So I invite you into that this evening. We're going to move from this, and we want to move into a place where we're going to take communion. So you can close Bibles, notebooks, whatever it is you have open, so that right now we can move into a space where we're going to give you that opportunity to take communion. This place where what Jesus created for us here on this day in His life is meant to be something that we actively take part in. Now, I'm saying it in a very simple way. I'll tell you this. You could miss it. You could walk through communion and go through the motions and not actually dive in. But if there's ever a time where I'm hoping that won't happen, it's now, because we just covered it. So that your point in taking communion could honestly say, okay, I want to do what Jesus has. And so maybe it is dealing with sin. Maybe in a place of saying, hey, I need His cleansing. I need His washing. I need what Jesus washed the disciples' feet. I need that. I need His rescue. And then out of that, you could celebrate just what Jesus rescued you out of, where you are, where you're going, and from that kind of just propel you into a space of just connecting with Him. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to pray. I'm going to ask God to lead us into that, and then Pastor Phil's going to come up. He's going to lead us in a couple of closing worship songs. You probably know how we do this on Wednesday nights, but again, just quick explanation. This is not a place where we're going to take communion together. I mean, we are taking it together in this room, but it's not a place where we're going to lead you in it. What's going to happen is after I'm done praying, they're going to put the communion elements right up here at the front of the church as well as in the back. And we're just going to invite you somewhere in the midst of these two songs. Somewhere in the midst of these two closing songs, just get up, go over, grab communion, and take it. Now, you can take it right there. You can take it in the back or up front. You can take it back to your chair. You can stand. You could kneel. Just however that works, and just take communion. By the way, quick FYI, cool new feature to our chairs in front of you is there's a communion cup holder right there in the midst of it. So when you're done taking communion, I should have taken a picture so you could see it, but it's that little square right there. So when you're done, just stick the communion cup down there so you don't have to sit there, because inevitably somebody sits there and plays with it and breaks it. So nevertheless, hey, I digress. So, hey, whenever you're ready, take communion. Somewhere in the midst of those two songs, make Jesus the focus, and then just continue worshiping with us, hoping that in the midst of this space, it would just be a place where God would meet you and strengthen you. So let's just ask Him to do that. Would you join me right now in prayer? Got to think about words, trying to describe the greatest, most impacting things in all eternity. And my words fail. I know that. But Jesus, I think about you getting ready to die on the cross. I think about giving your life for us. I think about you creating this space of communion, creating what that could be and would be. And Lord, I'm just grateful for it. I ask right now that you would draw us into it, that we wouldn't just go through the motions. Lord, that there would be cleansing right now, that right now just we would ask you, Lord, just let there be nothing between us and you. Turn it away, wash us, renew us, draw us back, and make us just those who can celebrate Jesus, who you are to us. And where that helps us, finding identity in you right now, where that helps us in the battle that we have with sin, may we find that here and now. May we find it in you, Jesus, is our everything. May it be so that as we remember you tonight, that's effective. So Lord, help us not just to go through the motions. Help it to be real. Lord, in that, I just pray for any that don't know you. I think of just speaking it about Judas and how that just going through the motions and just taking the cup, it didn't help him. Lord, and so for any here that don't know you, it's not going to help you and help them unless they're saved. God, you tell us when we take communion, we're proclaiming this. We're telling the gospel. We're saying, hey, this is what we are. So any that need to hear that, I pray that even now they'd hear it and they would be saved. God, would you do that work right now? We ask for it as we just thank you and we enter into this time to remember you.